The golden California sun bathed Rodeo Drive in a warm glow as Claire Anderson strolled down the iconic boulevard. At 45, Claire carried herself with quiet dignity. Her style wasn't flashy, she didn't need it to be. A simple white t-shirt, soft gray joggers, and comfortable sneakers were enough for her morning errands. Her coiled black hair was neatly tied back, and her makeup was minimal, revealing smooth, radiant skin that reflected both grace and self-respect. To the casual observer, she might have looked like any woman enjoying a relaxed day in Los Angeles. But Claire was far from ordinary. She had spent the last 15 years as the wife of Michael Anderson, one of the most successful private investors in the state. Together, they had built a quiet yet impactful legacy, balancing business, philanthropy, and a shared love for life's simpler joys. And today, Claire was on a personal mission. Her husband's birthday was just days away. After years of exchanging expensive gifts, Claire had learned that what Michael valued most wasn't the price tag, it was the thought behind the gesture. This year, she had found something truly special, a rare 1960s vintage timepiece, renowned for its craftsmanship and rich history. The watch was displayed at Elegance, a boutique known for exclusivity and refinement, nestled between world-famous designer stores. Claire paused outside the store's glass facade, eyeing the pristine displays under delicate lighting. Behind the windows, well-dressed customers were browsing while sharply dressed staff moved with a polished air of superiority. She knew how this world worked. She had seen it from the inside. But Claire never let wealth dictate her appearance or her self-worth. She adjusted the leather strap on her shoulder bag, took a deep breath, and stepped inside. The store's cool, perfumed air wrapped around her like silk. A soft chime marked her entrance, but no one looked up. Claire didn't mind. She made her way to the display case, where the vintage watch waited under the glass like a hidden treasure. She recognized it instantly, the silver casing, the delicate detailing, the history etched into every tick of its hands. It was perfect. Claire glanced at her watch. 10:30 a.m. She had more than enough time before her lunch reservation with Michael at noon. She intended to purchase the watch, have it wrapped, and surprise him during their meal. It was a small moment, but one she had been planning for weeks. What Claire didn't know, as she stood admiring the timepiece, was that this quiet act of love was about to become a moment of harsh judgment, and that the next hour would reveal not only the worst in others but the strength she carried with quiet pride. Claire Anderson stood quietly before the gleaming glass display, admiring the vintage timepiece she had researched so carefully. The warm undertones of the silver casing shimmered under the soft lighting. This was the one, an elegant and timeless gift for her husband, Michael. She didn't need to see anything else. A voice finally broke the stillness. "May I help you?" came a crisp tone, polite on the surface, yet thinly veiled with judgment. Claire turned to see a young sales associate in a sleek black dress. Her name tag read Jessica. The woman's hair was pulled tight in a no-nonsense bun, and her eyes quickly swept over Claire's outfit with clear disapproval. "Yes," Claire replied warmly, pointing to the watch behind the glass. "I'm interested in that one." Jessica's eyebrows rose, and her lips twitched into a practiced smile. "That particular piece is $85,000, she said, pronouncing each word as if it were a barrier. Claire nodded, unfazed. "I'm aware. I'd like to take a closer look, please." The hesitation was palpable. Jessica's fingers hovered over her key ring. "Perhaps I could show you something else, something more accessible. We carry beautiful costume pieces that are quite popular." Claire met her eyes, her voice calm but firm. "No, thank you. I came for this watch." With visible reluctance, Jessica unlocked the case and carefully placed the watch onto a velvet tray, sliding it across the counter with the guarded movement of someone who expected it to be snatched away. "This is a limited edition," she said. "Only 5 were ever made." Her tone made it clear she believed Claire couldn't possibly be a serious buyer. Claire gently picked up the watch and turned it in her hands, admiring the detail. "It's beautiful," she said softly. "I'll take it." Jessica blinked. "You'll take it? Would you like to go over financing options?" "That won't be necessary," Claire answered. From across the boutique, the manager, a tall man in an expensive suit with gel-slicked hair, began to observe the interaction. His name was Bradley Collins, and he prided himself on knowing his clientele by sight alone. And in his eyes, Claire didn't belong. Claire could feel his gaze, but she stayed focused on the moment. After all her years alongside Michael, she was no stranger to assumptions. Usually, she brushed them off. But today felt different. Her simple act of love was being treated as a fraud. In that moment, Claire wasn't just being questioned for what she could afford. She was being judged for who she was, how she looked, and the color of her skin. And as she stood there, dignified, composed, Claire sensed this encounter was no longer just about a birthday gift. It was about standing her ground, even when others couldn't see her worth. Claire Anderson had always believed in taking the high road. Growing up, her parents had taught her the value of composure, especially when others expected you to break. As she stood in that high-end boutique, facing subtle insults wrapped in politeness, she held on to that lesson like a shield. Jessica, the sales associate, continued to hover near the counter, arms folded tightly, as if guarding the watch from someone she still didn't believe could afford it. Claire didn't flinch. She had made her intentions perfectly clear. She wanted to purchase the vintage timepiece, not apply for credit, not browse cheaper options, and certainly not be talked down to. She glanced at the time. 10:45 a.m. Michael would arrive in just over an hour. Claire had planned to have the gift ready and wrapped before he got there. She wanted to surprise him, to celebrate their bond with something meaningful. But now, the experience was unraveling. Still, she refused to let their condescension steal her purpose. The sound of leather shoes tapping against the polished marble floor signaled the arrival of Bradley Collins. His smile was the kind one might wear in a boardroom negotiation, tight, calculated, and lacking sincerity. "Good morning," he said, directing his attention more toward Jessica than Claire. "Is there a problem here?" Jessica barely masked her smirk. "This customer is interested in the Chronomaster." Bradley's eyes turned fully to Claire. "Ah, yes. One of our most exclusive items." His gaze slowly traveled down her outfit before returning to her eyes. "Ma'am, for high-value pieces, we have a policy. We require proof of financial standing before completing a sale." Claire raised an eyebrow. "Proof? As in a card or bank statement?" "A platinum card at minimum," he replied. "Or verification of funds. We've unfortunately dealt with individuals wasting our time in the past." His words weren't just insulting, they were loaded. The implication was clear. Based on how she looked, he didn't think she belonged here. Claire took a breath, her voice steady. "I don't carry cards while I'm out for errands. But I assure you, this purchase won't be a problem. My husband is meeting me shortly." That was when it happened, the shift. Bradley's entire expression changed, not to respect, but to suspicion. "Ah, your husband," he said with a patronizing smile. "Of course." Claire recognized that tone. She had heard it before, the disbelief, the assumption that she was inventing a wealthy partner to explain her presence. It was a tired, old insult dressed in modern clothes. "I'd still like to complete the purchase," Claire said calmly. But she could already feel the air thickening. The battle lines were being drawn, not between money and merchandise, but between prejudice and principle. She knew this wouldn't be a simple transaction anymore. It was a matter of dignity. And she wasn't going to retreat. The boutique was silent for a moment, a silence not of peace, but of tension. Bradley Collins, the manager of elegance, had let his polished demeanor slip. What had begun as subtle discouragement had escalated into something uglier. Claire Anderson, a poised woman who had done nothing but ask to purchase a watch, now found herself the center of quiet stares and thinly veiled hostility. Other shoppers, once browsing in silence, were now casting sidelong glances. A well-dressed couple near the jewelry counter had stopped mid-conversation, their eyes flicking toward Claire, then quickly away as if the scene unfolding was too uncomfortable to fully witness. "I'm sorry," Bradley said, voice tight but unmistakably sharp, "but unless you can produce financial verification, we must ask that you leave." Claire's spine straightened. "I've already told you my husband will be here shortly. This watch is a surprise for him, something meaningful. I don't need to prove my worth to you just because I'm not dressed to your expectations." Bradley didn't budge. "Ma'am, we've had people like you come in, handle merchandise, take photos, and waste time. Social media is filled with these little fantasy shopper stunts." "People like me?" Claire asked, her voice barely above a whisper, but each word carried weight. The room seemed to still. "You're disrupting the atmosphere of this store," Bradley said, lowering his voice as he moved closer. "We cater to a certain clientele." "And what exactly does that mean?" she replied, eyes locked on his. "It means this boutique is for serious buyers, not people playing dress up," he said, gesturing subtly toward the door. "Now please, before I call security." The humiliation landed like a slap. Claire hadn't raised her voice. She hadn't caused a scene. All she'd done was ask to buy a watch. But still, she was being escorted out, treated like a fraud, dismissed not only as unworthy, but unwelcome. With quiet grace, Claire took a step back from the counter. Her voice remained calm, though her heart was racing. "The way you're treating me says far more about you than it ever could about me." Bradley moved toward the entrance and, without touching her, motioned firmly for her to exit. "Try the department stores downtown," he added, smugness curling in his tone. The heavy glass door clicked shut behind her. Outside, the sun was still shining, but now it felt harsher, exposing. Claire stood on the sidewalk, heart pounding, her breath tight in her chest. She could see Bradley inside, already laughing with the staff, tossing some comment over his shoulder that made Jessica smirk and shake her head. Claire looked down the block. She could wait there for Michael. Let him march in and make it right. But no, she had never needed to hide behind her husband's name. She wouldn't start now. Not even after being kicked out of a store that thought the label on her clothes mattered more than the strength in her character. Across town, Michael Anderson was wrapping up his morning of back-to-back meetings, though his thoughts had drifted more than once to his wife. Claire had told him she had something planned, a surprise for his birthday. After 15 years of marriage, he had learned to appreciate the quiet care she put into the smallest gestures. Her gifts weren't about the price. They were about the meaning behind them. At exactly 11:45 a.m., his black SUV pulled up to the curb near Elegance. The boutique's sleek facade shimmered in the sunlight, as pristine and cold as ever. Michael adjusted the cuffs of his navy blue suit and stepped out of the vehicle. At 48, he carried the confidence of a man who'd built an empire from the ground up. His salt and pepper hair gave him a distinguished air, and his tailored suit hinted at his success, but his eyes were searching. Claire wasn't standing outside as he'd expected. Perhaps she was still inside making her purchase. Just as he reached for the boutique door, a woman, middle-aged, elegant, and slightly hesitant, approached him. "Excuse me," she said. "Are you Michael Anderson?" Michael nodded. "Yes." "I thought so," the woman said, glancing toward the store. "I was inside earlier. I saw what happened to your wife. I felt you should know. The way they treated her, it was appalling. She walked that way." The woman pointed down the sidewalk. Michael's face darkened. He thanked her with a nod, his jaw tightening. That low simmer in his chest, that wasn't just offense. It was outrage. He pulled out his phone and texted his assistant, "Resht my 2 p.m. something's come up." The reply came instantly, "Done." "Everything okay?" "Will be," Michael typed back. He didn't call Claire. Not yet. Instead, he stood in place for a moment, watching through the glass storefront. Inside, the staff were smiling, chatting. The manager, Bradley Collins, clearly in charge, was laughing with 2 sales associates, their body language casual, even smug. Something about it made Michael's stomach turn. Then, down the block, he saw her. Claire was walking slowly back toward the boutique. Her posture was straight, but he could tell, he knew her well enough to sense the weight she carried. Their eyes met. Claire's lips parted, as if to explain, but then she simply placed a hand on his arm. "I was just taking a walk," she said gently. "How was your morning?" Michael studied her. Her face was composed, but the pain was there, tucked just beneath the surface. "Someone told me what happened in there," he said softly. Claire sighed, not from weakness, but from weariness. "It's not the first time I've been judged by how I look," she said. "It probably won't be the last." "It shouldn't happen at all," Michael replied, his voice calm but edged with steel. "Especially not to you." Without another word, he turned and walked toward the boutique, his steps deliberate, his intent clear. Inside the boutique, laughter lingered in the air like expensive perfume, light, practiced, and superficial. Bradley Collins was recounting the incident to Jessica and another staff member, his tone filled with smug amusement. "She looked like she just rolled out of a yoga class," he chuckled. "And wanted to buy the Chronomaster? Please. These people think a clean pair of sneakers makes them luxury ready." Jessica laughed, though nervously. The front door hadn't chimed in a few minutes. But then, it did. The energy shifted instantly. Robert, or rather, Michael Anderson, entered with a calm authority that didn't need to be announced. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. His tailored suit, composed stance, and piercing gaze made it instantly clear, this was a man used to commanding boardrooms, not boutiques, and certainly not excuses. Bradley's rehearsed professionalism kicked in. "Good afternoon, sir. Welcome to Elegance. How may we assist you today?" Michael didn't return the smile. "You can start by telling me why you just threw my wife out of your store." The words landed like a glass shattering on marble. Behind him, Claire had stepped quietly into the store. She didn't speak, she didn't need to. Her presence confirmed everything. Recognition dawned slowly, like a bad hangover. Jessica's mouth opened but no words came. Bradley turned pale. I didn't know she was your wife," he stammered. "That's exactly the problem," Michael replied, his voice even. "You shouldn't have to know who someone is to treat them with respect." The boutique fell silent. Shoppers froze mid-step. A woman near the fragrance display quietly backed away, sensing a moment that wasn't meant to be interrupted. Michael turned to Claire. "Was that the watch you wanted?" he asked, motioning to the vintage piece still resting on the velvet pad. Claire nodded quietly. "Yes." Michael faced Bradley again, his tone cooling further. "I'd like to speak to the owner." Bradley swallowed hard. "Mr. Goldstein is in New York this week, but I'm the general manager. I have full authority to." "Perfect," Michael interrupted. He reached into his jacket and handed over a business card. "Then you'll have full authority to explain to Mr. Goldstein why Elegance is about to face a very public relations crisis, and why your most exclusive inventory is about to lose one of its largest investors." Bradley stared at the card. His hands trembled slightly. Michael took one slow step forward. "Because in case you didn't know, my firm finalized acquisition of controlling interest in Goldstein Retail Holdings this morning. Technically, I'm your boss now." A collective gasp rippled through the boutique. Employees stiffened. The air turned from smug to stunned. "But I'm not just here to make a point," Michael added. "I'm here to set a standard. And step one is very simple. You're going to apologize to my wife, not because she's my wife, but because she deserved basic human dignity the moment she walked in." Bradley's voice cracked as he turned to Claire. "Mrs. Anderson, I'm deeply sorry for how I treated you. It was inexcusable." The apology was weak, but it was a start. Michael nodded once. "Now let's talk about consequences." The boutique remained quiet, as if holding its breath. Michael Anderson stood beside his wife, his presence as steady as a stone monument. Bradley Collins, who just moments ago had been laughing at Claire's expense, now seemed visibly shaken. The smugness had vanished. In its place was the pale-faced realization that everything had changed, and not in his favor. "I could fire you right now," Michael said calmly, slipping his business card back into his jacket. "Believe me, it's within my rights. But that would be too easy." Bradley blinked, uncertain. "Too easy, sir?" Michael's expression didn't waver. "Yes. You see, this isn't just about one rude encounter in one store on one street. It's about a pattern. A culture that rewards appearances over substance, polish over principle." Jessica, still standing nearby, had gone quiet. The other employees were frozen in place, not daring to move. Michael continued, "That stops today. Elegance will be launching a new employee training program next month on unconscious bias, respectful communication, and equitable customer service. And my wife, Claire Anderson, has graciously agreed to oversee its development." Claire turned to her husband, eyes wide with surprise. She hadn't expected that. Michael met her gaze with a subtle smile. "No one understands this better than you do." Claire understood the gesture. He wasn't doing this for revenge. He was creating something that would last, a way to turn humiliation into meaningful change. "I would appreciate that opportunity," she said softly, then looked toward Bradley, who now seemed both remorseful and embarrassed. Michael turned back to the manager. "Now, as for you, your alternative is immediate resignation. You can either take this opportunity to learn and lead by example or leave today." Bradley swallowed hard, his pride clearly at war with self-preservation. "Mr. Anderson, I would like to stay. I want to do better." Michael nodded once. "Then training begins next week." He gestured toward the counter. "And now, if you'll kindly complete the original transaction. We have a lunch reservation to keep." With trembling hands, Bradley turned toward the velvet tray where the Chronomaster watch still lay untouched. He picked it up gently, wrapped it in premium packaging, and handed it over as if it were a crown. His tone was hushed, his earlier arrogance nowhere to be found. "Thank you," Claire said, taking the box with grace. As they turned to leave, whispers erupted behind them. The story would travel down Rodeo Drive before the sun had even begun to set. A tale of a simple woman in joggers, dismissed, judged, and then dignified, had just rewritten the rules inside one of LA's most exclusive stores. Not through anger, not through force, but through character, conviction, and calm power. As Claire and Michael Anderson stepped out of Elegance, the boutique's heavy glass door gently closed behind them, not with finality, but with quiet resolution. The morning sun still glowed across Rodeo Drive, but something about the atmosphere had changed. There was a hush in the air, as though the store itself had learned something it wouldn't soon forget. Behind them, murmurs rose. Staff whispered among themselves. A few customers who had witnessed everything nodded silently, as if affirming the lesson that had just unfolded. Claire, holding the neatly wrapped watch box in her hand, walked beside her husband with poise. She hadn't raised her voice. She hadn't demanded recognition. Yet somehow, she had commanded respect more powerfully than anyone else in that building. A black SUV pulled smoothly to the curb. The driver, James, quickly stepped out to open the door, but Michael waved him off with a smile. "We're walking to lunch," he said, taking Claire's hand in his. Just a few blocks away, at a quiet bistro they both loved, the couple settled into a shaded corner table. The waiter, recognizing them, greeted them with genuine warmth, not because of who they were on paper, but because they were known to treat everyone with kindness. Claire set the gift box gently on the table. "Still want to see what's inside?" she asked playfully. Michael grinned. "I think I already know what it is." He opened it slowly, revealing the vintage watch, its craftsmanship exquisite, its history rich, its meaning now far deeper than she could have planned. Michael fastened it around his wrist, admiring the weight and balance. "It's perfect," he said. "But not because it's rare. It's perfect because you chose it." Claire smiled, though her eyes were still reflecting all that had transpired. "I didn't expect any of that today." "I know," he replied. "But the world still makes assumptions. About race. About clothing. About status. But every now and then, someone gets the chance to shatter those assumptions." Claire looked out over the sidewalk. Pedestrians passed by, many of them dressed just like she had been that morning, comfortably, casually, unknowingly subject to judgment from people who thought expensive meant important. "We didn't just buy a watch today," she said softly. "No," Michael agreed. "We bought back a little dignity, not just for us, but for every person who's ever been told they don't belong." Their hands touched across the table. There was no need for grand declarations. Just the quiet satisfaction of knowing that dignity, once defended, becomes a beacon for others. Some lessons can't be taught in classrooms or wrapped in luxury. Sometimes, they walk in wearing gray joggers, speak calmly, and leave behind a legacy louder than any label. This story, at its core, reminds us of a truth that never ages. Real value isn't measured by what you wear, what you drive, or how others perceive you. It's measured by how you carry yourself when no one is watching, and especially when everyone is judging. Claire Anderson walked into that boutique not trying to prove anything. She didn't need to. She knew who she was. But the world didn't see her confidence, her history, or her dignity. They saw her clothing. And in a moment, assumptions took the place of humanity. For many older adults, this hits close to home. As we age, we're often overlooked or underestimated. But like Claire, We have a lifetime of wisdom, grace, and quiet strength that doesn't demand attention, it earns it. And when someone crosses a line, we have the power to stand our ground with civility, not rage, with values, not vengeance. This story is a call to resist shallow judgment, not only from others but from ourselves. Don't let appearances fool you, and don't ever believe that your dignity depends on recognition. It doesn't. It depends on how you live. Whether you're walking into a store, sitting in a doctor's office, or speaking to a grandchild, remember this: your presence carries weight. Your story carries value. And your kindness, your calm, and your courage can shift the atmosphere of any room. Because at the end of the day, respect is not something you demand. It's something you embody. And sometimes, it takes a quiet moment, like Claire's, to remind the world what true class really looks like.